Okay then, so let's get the show on the road. So good afternoon everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on the uncomfortable truth about your backups. So as a quick introduction, my name is Adrian Sweeney and I'm the Sales Director here at Planet IT. And firstly, thank you all for taking the time to attend today's webinar. Firstly, please feel free to drop any questions into the questions tab at the top anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll have some time at the end to answer all of these for you. So if anything pops to mind as we're going through the webinar, just drop it straight into the questions tab and our backup experts will be able to answer those for you at the end. So on to the next slide. So firstly, for those of you that don't know Planet, I wanted to do a very quick introduction on who we are. Firstly, don't worry, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here on every area, but essentially I wanted to quickly illustrate some of the main areas we can help companies like yourselves here at Planet IT. Firstly, we have a range of IT support packages where we can act as a full outsourcing service, providing both remote and on-site support. Or we have our fourth line support packages, which provides IT teams with access to our senior engineers for help with escalation, remediation, and also holiday cover. We also have a large team of experienced IT project engineers here at Planet who can provide us specialist skills to deliver on any size IT project across a number of vendors. And also here at Planet, we have two dedicated teams of security and backup specialists, hence the webinar today, that can help advise, implement and support a number of technologies. And to complement all of this, we have recently set up our new voice and connectivity department to help our clients provide reliable and trusted solutions for all things communication. All of this right through to providing you with costs on almost all of your day-to-day IT-related hardware, software, and cloud services. Essentially, if you have any products or services you require in any of the above, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team, and we'll be more than happy to discuss your requirements, and we have a specialist in every area that you can have access to. So on to the next slide. So on to who will be running today's webinar. At Planet, we have a tongue-in-cheek saying, in Mr. Davey we trust, and as head of our backup services department, his team is responsible for monitoring and remediating over 100 of our support clients' backup environments. Mike has been with the team now for over 9 years, and as a side note, is also a fantastic guitarist and singer. So Mike, over to yourself.
Thank you very much, Aid. Appreciate it. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. As Aid's already said, thank you all for joining us today. I hope it's no secret at this point with my face and my name splashed all over the screen that I am Michael Davey. I am the Backup Services Manager here at Planet IT. I've had the pleasure of, as Aid said, of working with Planet for the last 9 years throughout the inception of our services team that started back in 2013. And I've seen Planet IT grow from an IT reseller to what we are now as a value-added managed service provider. We're backed by an award-winning services team, some of the best minds I've had the privilege of working with in the industry, both in our staff and our partners. And as much as I'd love to wax lyrical on the right image there and go on about the music skills, that's not what we're here for. My role at Planet, as Aid has alluded to, is to live and breathe all things backup. Some might argue not quite as interesting as playing music. I disagree. It's great fun, but from retention policies to DR plans, retention on RTO and RPO, storage analysis, my team is there. We're on hand to ensure all of our customers can sleep easy, knowing that they're covered should the worst occur. And also our experts provide catered, flexible, secure solutions using our best-in-class technologies to suit your data security objectives, regardless of your size, regardless of your environment, and regardless of your budgeting objectives also. But that's enough about me. Why have we asked you to join us here today? So to start things off, I've realized over the last 5 years, we've noticed that the landscape of backup and data storage has significantly changed. Data is growing exponentially. Disaster recovery systems have had to adapt and chase after them to cope with these rapid changes. And I was looking at it and thinking it's been quite a while since I've seen storage rotations, perpetual full backups, standard GFS, grandfather, father, son, retentions, or even split resource backups, where you might take a portion of your server's resources in SQL and applications and back it up differently to how you may do the data in the operating system alongside it. It's been quite some time, as I say, since any of these things have really appeared in many of the standard configurations that I've seen. Now, that's not to say, of course, there are going to be specialist requirements, but it's become quite clear to me and to our team here that the way that we look at backups has significantly changed. Now, some of those key areas that we've seen, so that I can sort of highlight these out to you and give you our perspective, are as follows. High integration has become a huge area over the last 5 years, specifically within the last 18 months. I know that myself and a lot of the guys here at Planet have been on many of these new normal post-COVID webinars. I really don't want to make this one of them, but obviously the last 18 months has had a significant impact in how we're integrating with certain cloud services and software as a service, and kind of breaking out of the being sat at a desk working at a local server. So that's been a huge impact. The increased security of backup practices, such as looking at new things with air gapping, immutability, and encryption. And that means encryption both at a service level throughout the software and through the backup practices themselves, as well as encrypted storage on either end of the equation. We've also seen massive increases in the efficiency of storage and storage efficiency tasks overall, such as deduplication, compression, forever forward incremental cycles, and also data segregations, the idea of only applying significant policies to the data that you're actively working on and applying archival policies that can be on slightly slower, as we often refer to it, dumb storage, and therefore not impacting the overall plan as a whole. We've also seen a lot more with regards to scalability. With this rapid growth, it's very difficult to plan for keeping up with those changes if you aren't planning for them properly. So not being able to know how your data is likely to grow could lead you in a position where you may run out of storage, and that's the last place anyone wants to be. But we try and look at all of the solutions that we put in place to ensure scalability is designed in there from the conception. And then lastly, drastically tightened requirements for RTO and RPO. For those that don't know, the RTO being your recovery time objective, the RPO being your recovery point objective, effectively meaning when can you afford to go back to in the event of invoking a disaster recovery scenario, and how long can you afford to be down for? Now that's changed again dramatically, certainly over the last 5 years, but more so even in the last 6 to 18 months. Long gone are the days where the majority of businesses can say, actually, we can cope working on pen and paper, picking up the phone, and be down for 24 to 48 hours. Nowadays, it's more realistic that people are saying they can only be down for 1 to 4. And even then, the cost implications to their business of having that small amount of time offline can be very severe. So those are the key areas of change that we've really noticed that are sort of driving a lot of the changes in our attitude towards backups and a lot of our customers' attitudes towards backups. But then we have to ask ourselves, what has provoked all of this change? So we're going to be covering a lot of this throughout the presentation here today, but I wanted to kind of lean into some of these to give an idea of what we've noticed and where we've seen these key areas develop from. So the first one, as I said in the previous slide, the adoption of cloud services. It is no secret that over 90%, I would argue, of the customers that we speak to these days, if not higher, are now dealing with outsourced cloud-hosted email solutions and in many cases communication solutions. So things like Office 365, Google Suite, and other associated vendors. But not only that, a lot of the time now we're looking where software as a service is impacting finance systems, it's impacting payroll, it's impacting your CRM systems. So you may well be using stuff like Microsoft Dynamics, you might be using AX, you might be using Salesforce, and even with your banking services. All of these software providers, even those such as Sage for the SMB that are typically known for being quite an on-site, on-server presence, have allowed for integration into the cloud. So I've no doubt that the situation over the last 18 months has impacted that significantly more so than before, but the adoption of cloud services is something that we just can't ignore at this point now within your business and DR strategy. The next being the increased speed and efficiency of storage. So good news, all storage is getting better, getting faster, and also when we look at a price per gigabyte, getting cheaper. It's never been easier. And it's never been cheaper to get into big storage and big data. We've noticed significant drops in as much as 60%. depending on the type of storage that you're going for. We're looking at a lot more adoption of solid state across the board. Solid state is no longer just a nice to have on some more critical systems, or perhaps something you might use for caching within your critical systems. We're seeing a lot of people adopt it across the board. And also linking into those cloud services, a lot of data centers and people that we're speaking to are adopting full SSD technologies on their back end as well. So it's a great time to be in a storage position of wanting to increase that, because it really has driven a lot of that change, we believe. The fidelity of data and the growth of data. So even if you haven't necessarily as a business added a huge amount in terms of what you're storing and what your data is, just the nature of the game changing so much over the last 5 years could mean that, for example, a video file that may have been recorded and taken 5 to 10 years ago may have been filmed in 360p, which would have been fine and compatible for that point in time. And let's say it was 10 or 20 meg at the time. If you were to refilm that these days with the most up-to-date technology that's available to us, you could be looking at 4K, you could be looking at 8K. And so the fidelity of that file will have changed dramatically. No longer is it 10 meg, we could be looking at 8 to 16 to even higher in gigabytes, which is thousands of % increase on what you were using before. But the content itself, despite the quality of it, the content itself hasn't actually changed. Now, that's also the same that we find for Excel documents. As more functions and features are added into those, PowerPoint presentations that we're looking at now, Word documents, all of these things, as they're adding features and adding functionality into them, the fidelity and the growth of those files, just by existing over time, naturally is going to increase. And lastly, the ever-changing landscape of cyber threats. Now, this one, it's a contentious subject, one that we could probably do an entire webinar dedicated to on its own, but it is a very difficult area and a significant area of concern. Cyber threats are one of the biggest moving pieces that we've found, certainly within how backup solutions and backup vendors are changing their products, but also in how we're changing how backup solutions work and how we implement them for our customers. Not only is it any longer a case of ticking a box for compliance, we're now looking much further into, okay, well, what's the contingency from A to B? And then what's the contingency from B to C? And so on and so forth. And you can overlook it, and at the same time you can look too much into it sometimes, but we like to think we find a very good balance between these. We deal with solution providers like ArcServe, who we have the pleasure of having a guest speaker with us today who will go into a little bit more detail on this, but it's more common certainly these days than I think it ever has been that security and backup have to work in conjunction with each other to establish a fully functional disaster recovery plan. So some real world examples of how some of these things that we've seen now, for obvious reasons, we can't go into a huge amount of detail in terms of names or costs or elements like that, but I do have some real world examples here to sort of highlight and discuss. So the first one is a company had approached us. They had been, they'd been attacked by ransomware. They contacted us and had informed us that all of their on-site data had been encrypted. Thankfully, their off-site data was clean, so their backups that we were able to recover from an off-site repository with them were in a good state. But we had to download those and restore them on site onto cleaned hardware. So there was a case of we had to wipe the existing, make sure that it wasn't compromised anymore, get that cleaned up and ready, and then download all of that data again. And we are talking in the realms of between 5 to 10 terabytes. So it wasn't a small amount of data. And it wasn't the best internet connection in the world either. So it did take a reasonable amount of time for us to facilitate that for them. And as it says here, they were down for 7 days in total, completely. And the impact actually saw them for an additional 30 days until the full functionality was eventually restored. Now, a lot of people ask when we raise these examples, how could that have been avoided? Well, in this instance, it is quite difficult, but having some form of immutable or air-gapped replication of those servers and services would have been very useful, because in the replication instance, it's just a case of turning them on. And you're then looking at perhaps the difference between going back 24 hours. So again, we're now looking at this RPO, this recovery point objective. You're going back 24 hours on a backup as opposed to potentially less than 4 hours on a replication. And once that server's turned on, there's of course some admin that needs to be done in the background, which our teams often will also assist, if not already be assisting and dealing with, to repoint everybody to those replicated instances. but it's a much faster path to recovery. And we have since looked at and implemented this for them as an additional safeguard moving forward. Second example that we have here, again, another company that approached Planet IT. Neither of these companies have been working with us prior, but approached Planet IT with an issue where they'd got complete loss of their communication system. So their Office 365 environment had been compromised through a phishing campaign. Now, we worked with them using an archival service that they had, as well as locally cached data and information to work on restoring 10 years of archived data in the form of emails and files. And they were for 3 days without any access to their emails or phone system, because that was integrated into Teams, because we had to bring everything offline. Everything had to be brought offline to safeguard while everything was cleaned up. And then the restore functionality and tasks were quite significant, meaning that there was a lot of uploading, there was a lot of synchronization, a lot of checking and rechecking before anybody was then confident that things were back to a point where they could continue working. But again, the impact of that lasted with them for quite some time. Now, had they had a solution in place where their backup was there for their Office 365 environment, it would have been simply a case of wipe and redo. We could have just completely deleted the tenant environment, restored it entirely from the backup. And whilst, of course, there would be an element of downtime involved in that, they could have been up in as little as 24 hours with their core systems and functionality. And then we can look into drip feeding that remaining 10 years of data that needs to be recovered on a prioritized basis that just keeps the comms open and keeps those going. So it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon at all. And we're seeing, certainly at the moment as well, we're noticing a lot of threats that are peeping up on the horizon, so to speak. Everybody's starting to reopen again. Schools are starting to reopen again. Businesses are starting to open their doors, and people have noticed. And unfortunately, that does include the people who we don't want to. So it is really crucial to make sure that you are comfortable and that you have thought about any of the risks that are currently within your environment and done everything that you can to mitigate against them. Now, enough of the scary stuff. What I'd actually really like to do is start to introduce our guest speaker for today. Stephen Butterfield from ArcServe is joining us today. He's going to talk in a little bit more detail about some of the core areas that we highlighted on the invitation to this webinar. So I'll just quickly go through those at surface level, and then I'll let Steve take over, who can go and really highlight the reason why we have approached ArcServe more so now than ever, and the technologies that they're able to provide us that assist us against combating against these specific objectives. So the first one that we're going to be looking into is Office 365. It is a huge area for all businesses that we're finding these days, even if it's only in part, even if it's only for the email, only for Teams, only for OneDrive, or only for SharePoint, or any combination of the above. There is no denying it is a huge player. And the solution that ArcServe can provide against this is fantastic. So we will definitely be talking for a few more areas around this. Immutable storage and ransomware protection. So the idea of having somewhere that is permanently secure, something that's offline, something that's not changeable, and how that can be integrated within your backup systems should they become compromised. The old school 3-2-1 rule, which anyone who's worked with backups for any period of time will, I'm sure, be aware of. The idea of 3 copies of your data, 2 different media sets for them, one of which is offsite. We'll be delving into the importance of the 3-2-1 rule, and in fact also some very interesting advancements on this that ArcServe have been looking into. How scaling your infrastructure is possible, more so than ever these days, not only with the case of increasing the storage that you have or allowing for increase of storage from the get-go, but also how you can change your data to allow you an easier path to scaling moving forward. And linking into that, what it means with storage creep. So how we can avoid ever increasing data size changes, as we spoke briefly on the previous slides there, and what ArcServe specifically can do to assist you in that moving forward. So thank you all for that. I'm sure I'm certainly bored of my voice by now. I hope you guys aren't quite so much, but I will hand over to Steve. Steve, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate the intro. So, yeah, my name's Steve Butterfield. I'm a pre-sales consultant here at AXA. I've been with the organisation for about 2 years, but in actual fact, I've been working with AXA technology as well as other backup vendors for quite a number of years before that. So my background is around infrastructure, virtualization, and next generation storage, and obviously backup, as you would expect. So let me tell you a little bit about AXA for background in case you haven't heard of us before. So we are the world's most experienced data protection provider. Now, the reason we say that is we are actually the longest standing data protection provider. We were established way back in 1983. Now, there are products around that you may think have been around longer, but to give you some examples, some of the kind of other big beasts of the backup industry are people like Veritas, born in 1993, Commvault, 1996, and one I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, Veeam, was only 2006. So, all of our contemporaries are all younger than us. Now, age is not necessarily always a massive advantage. In backup, it certainly is, because experience is a real key thing, and stability in backup companies is a real key factor. But in addition to that, we as a company broke ourselves out and went independent from our former owners, Computer Associates, about 7 years ago now. And for that reason, we actually kind of were almost reborn. We had the ability to rely on the products that we had for quite some while, but we actually came out of that ownership with a new product. So we very much feel like a startup on the inside, and a startup that's both got the wealth of knowledge and ability, but also the stability to kind of keep up with the changes and the changing demands, as Michael mentioned, in the backup world today. So next slide, please. So one of the features today is to drill down a little bit on Office 365 and our ability to protect that. And as we have a number of different data sources with Office 365, and as Michael mentioned, a few of them, Exchange Online, OneDrive, SharePoint, and particularly in the last year and a half, as things like the effects of home working and pandemics have taken hold, there's been increased reliance on some of these services for organizations. And yet these services are not necessarily thought out to the same extent that perhaps when they were on premise, you did think them out. And one of the things that surprises a number of people is where the responsibilities start and end between you, the end user or customer of Microsoft, and Microsoft. Now, this is a slide directly from Microsoft, but it's a similar story for pretty much any cloud or software as a service provider. You will retain some responsibility in all situations, regardless of what kind of service that you're buying. So if we look at this diagram here, this is showing everything from kind of, you operating everything on premise, where clearly you're responsible for everything included, but, stepping up through infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. The short version is the data contained within those services is always your responsibility. Now, it's unfortunate, I think, that a number of people have kind of considered the move to Office 365 as being, well, it's very like when we operated Exchange in-house, except Microsoft now look after it. And there's an assumption that they do everything that you used to do. But you will find in here no mention of the sort of data recovery SLAs and the recovery time objectives, the recovery point objectives. None of that will appear in Office 365 documentation because that is not their responsibility. Microsoft's fundamental responsibility around things like platforms like Office 365. And again, I may sound like I'm Microsoft bashing, I'm certainly not. And I do think it's a great service. Who wants to look after an Exchange server after all? But they responsibility for it still lies with you, as it would do if you had machines running in AWS or any other cloud provider. So some people have justified the move with the savings that they make in no longer have to back it up even. But the reality of the situation is you still do need to back it up. And I'm going to go to the next slide now and just tell you some of the reasons why. So if we look at this breakdown here, I won't read out the individual bullet items here, but there are some severe limitations around what is provided by Microsoft around your data, remembering that their responsibility in reality is the availability and recovery from disasters of their platform, not the data. So, some people will say, okay, well, we can recover data by bringing it back from the recycle bin. And there is a limited amount that you can do with that. But there is no point in time restoration. You can't get back the email as it was 3 weeks ago, or 3 months ago, or 3 years ago. You can't get back the data from the employee that left 6 months ago. Those kinds of things which were taken for granted when you ran Exchange on site, those kind of things are simply not available in this platform. Offsite backup, simply not supported. There is not a built-in way in Microsoft to get that data offsite on a regular and automated basis. And that really, tells you a few of the shortfalls of what Microsoft do. Now, if we go to the next slide, then this covers more what Microsoft do provide. Excuse me. They do provide some recoverability with things like recovering items from the trash I already mentioned. Legal discovery, often used by a number of users out there simply as a way of avoiding having to back up. Maybe someone leaves. And what you can do is put a legal hold on an account, and that will stay around for an amount of time. But the problem is the rules change. So as an instance, there used to be a facility within Office 365 called In Place Hold, but Microsoft removed that availability, that as a feature in April 2020. So, you may have accounts on hold that you thought were still there, and that rule has changed and now they're not. But, the data's only in Microsoft. You don't have any control over either the SLAs around availability, the SLAs about recovery, and, some of those features, such as legal hold, don't even appear in some tiers within Office 365, and that's not always clear either. So, is there an amount of recovery? Absolutely, there is. But what there is, if it is possible to get the data, and that's not the case for all data, what there is cumbersome, it's time consuming, and it doesn't meet the 3-2-1 rule. And the 3-2-1 rule is an underlying factor in all backup. It's been a mantra of the backup industry for a number of years now. So, the simple version of it is here, three copies of the data, the original, the primary and 2 backups. And those other copies, they should be kept on 2 different media so that you have, a disk outage isn't going to take out all disk copies. So you do need it on 2 media. And then you have a cloud copy or an offsite copy. So you have something away, and that's insulation against any kind of disaster that can take potentially a whole site out. Fires, floods, those kinds of things. So this has kind of been an underpinning of data protection for a long, long time. But again, as Michael mentioned earlier, the world is changing. We used to be about protection against occasional data loss, against occasional machine outages. We were protected against things like single points of failure here, whether that single point was a site, a server, a user, any of those things. And this 3-2-1 process has helped us through a number of years to protect about that kind of thing. But if we just go on now, the world's evolved and 321 isn't enough anymore. So, I just want to introduce you to 3211, which is what people talk about now. And that's because the nature, there are additional threats to that data. So the additional one now is the ability to have an offline or immutable copy of that data. Because when 321 was designed, the idea of cyber threats and large-scale encryption events wasn't on the horizon. People weren't thinking about that kind of thing. Didn't really affect anyone back then. But now, it's increasingly a common thing. And a lot of people, some people may say, okay, but in the rare occasion that it happens, then, maybe I'll pay the ransom and get my money back. But, we partner with a company called Sophos, who were a kind of top right Gartner company for data protection. And they produced a report called the State of Ransomware 2021 a couple of days ago, and it was just pointing out that paying up doesn't pay off. And what they were saying is 32% in the last year of customers affected by data encryption events actually paid the ransom, but fewer than 1 in 10 of those actually got all of their data back. The average amount of data that they got back was 65%. But 29% of those that paid got less than half of the data back. So, an encryption event is an awful thing to happen. And even if you pay the ransom and the ransoms are going up all the time, then the chances of getting all the data back are negligible, and enough of it to make you operational again, still even lower. So, it's an awful world to live in, to have to protect against that. But immutability and the ability to have immutable data that cannot be encrypted does give you a last line of defense against that kind of attack. So if we go to the next slide, so how do you combat against that kind of thing? Well, the fact of the matter is, you need an array of solutions. You need an array of solutions because no one silver bullet will protect you against all the potential events that you will see. And anyone that says don't worry, we've got immutable storage, therefore you're safe, that's just one part of the armory. It's a little bit in the security world, a little bit like saying, well, we don't need AV software, do we? Because we have firewalls. All the tools are designed to suit the different problems, and it's only when they work well and coordinated then that they can attack and prevent problems like this. And fundamentally, you don't want to be the integrator having to build this yourself. So what we provide as a service or as a solution, it combines a number of pieces here. So I'm just going to list out the pieces here. So the hardware, we supply appliances, so it's a turnkey product. So the hardware is vetted by us. It contains all the facilities that you need. It's resourced correctly, both for backup and for disaster recovery, because backup's fine, but where are you going to put the data when you do have that disaster? So if we go on to the next part of that, then that's the software. So the idea of buying an appliance is a combination of the software and the hardware, but you need more. That's kind of been around for a little while now. So what are the other features that we might need? Well, the next one would be endpoint protection. Increasingly, we're finding, and this is backed up by data from the security industry, increasingly the backup is becoming the first point of attack. And the reason for it is obvious, that the backup is your last resort. That's your way out if someone encrypts your data. Okay, go get the tapes, go get the backup, go bring the data back. Well, if that recovery option is cut off from you and the backups have been encrypted, then you don't have a way back. Pretty much your only choice starts to become, do I have to pay the ransom? And even then, will I get the data back? So that's, endpoint protection is certainly a significant part of this. But then we go on to, fourth part here, immutable copies. So immutable copies, again, on its own, not a solution. You could be putting malware into immutable storage, and then you've got a permanent copy of that malware, and you recover it from it, and it starts to encrypt all over again. And that's why the hardware and the software part of this and the endpoint protection actually can be used in a coordinated way. And what we do at ArcServe is we have a facility called Assured Recovery. And what Assured Recovery will allow you to do is test every backup. So you test the backup, you can potentially use the endpoint protection to scan the backup, whether that's just the data or the full booted virtual machine in a sandbox environment. Then you can test that data and know what you have is a recoverable and untarnished image before putting this thing into immutable software, into immutable storage. But of course, we still have the traditional problem of what about things like site outages? And that's where the last piece of this comes in with offsite copy. Now that offsite copy, can be as simple as, and it's an old way of doing it, but still valid, tape. You can write to tape, send those tapes off to Iron Mountain or whatever storage facility that you might have somewhere away. It still does insulate you against disasters that take out a complete site. Cloud has become much more popular as being the offsite copy, for the simple reason that, and people have noticed over the last year and a half in particular, mechanical, physical handling of media, such as tapes, isn't always possible. If the office is in lockdown, what do you do about getting the tapes out? And whenever the tapes are still online, they are potentially, subject to, attack. So, we have all these pieces that need to be used in concert to protect the environment, but that looks like a lot of moving parts to integrate yourself. How do you manage all those interfaces? How do you know they all are gonna work together effectively? So that's where we come in as ArcServe, because we can provide all of that in one package. And I'll detail how we do that. So we have appliances. So the appliances are already that that package of the software and the hardware. It's a turnkey appliance. It shows up, plugs in, and can be doing backups typically in the same half of the day they arrived in. So rapid deployment, easy deployment, pre-integrated software and hardware, and only one support organization to talk to about it. We then add in Sophos. So we have an OEM agreement with Sophos. We supply Sophos as endpoint protection on both our appliances and with our software now. So you can be assured that your backup server, your backup repository is secured by an absolutely leading edge protection provider. We have seen other backup vendors go down the route of trying to develop their own, but they're not experts in this area. So we integrated with someone who is a recognized expert in this area, and that's how we protect things. Use a combination of AI as well as known threat scans, including real-time snapshotting and real-time crypto rollback. If someone detects crypto happening, we can roll it back immediately and terminate the process. In addition to the Sophos, we answer immutable storage we've recently merged with a company called StorageCraft. They have a product called OneSafe. We've now integrated this with ArcServe, and this can be used as a immutable repository. It uses our same deduplication technology, our replication technology, that all mean that your third actually immutable copy can be created in minutes. We only have to transmit data that's non-unique to the StorageCraft device. It sits there. It looks like a NAS device. It's actually scale out, so as you grow we can scale with it, but in addition to that, even if someone does come in and subjects the data to encryption, it will even look as if it was encrypted. The trick to it is that it does snapshots every 90 seconds. So you get an encryption event, you simply promote the data from 90 seconds before that encryption event. You can have that data back online in under 30 seconds and start recovering from it from that point immediately. So really rapid recovery, completely scalable, but completely crypto proof. And then finally, we still offer our cloud for that traditional disaster of a site recovery requirement, and that cloud copy can be either simply an offsite copy of the data, but it can also operate as a complete recovery site in the cloud in the event that you do have a site outage and you need those virtual machines up and running in a cloud environment quickly. So that's kind of, we have pieced all this together. So this is from one vendor, managed by one vendor, one support, and we are so confident in the solution that we offer a money-back guarantee. We underwrite this solution. You may be concerned about crypto, but there are no other backup vendors out there that offer, that put their money where their mouth is and say, in the event that you cannot get your data back, we will give you your money back. No one else does that. So that's kind of the end-to-end way in which we protect you against, both traditional and more recent threats. But let's move on to the next slide now and just show you, kind of, okay, that sounds great. It's a really complete solution, but what kind of organization, does this suit? Now, you may think, your organization's too small, too large. This is really just showing you the range of the appliances that we supply. Now, this is single appliances, and we go all the way from 12 terabytes up to 3 petabytes in a single unit. So, the range, I think, surpasses pretty much every other backup vendor. You can enter this range at any point in it. You can expand those even beyond any of the figures in here. So all of those units contain some internal expansion capabilities, so you can add, you will have empty bays, you can scale it, you can buy a 1 petabyte appliance and scale up to 3 petabytes without increasing the rack footprint. It's just using slots available within the unit itself. But beyond that, we can scale horizontally as well. So our one console can manage as many different sites and as many different backup servers as you may wish to. We have quite a lot of education customers, and in things like academy trusts, we have customers that are managing 40 schools, but they can do so all from a single console, and all have the benefit of these facilities, regardless of how small or large they are. Now, I'll go on to the final point really that I wanted to make today, which is about storage creep. And storage creep, it happens. There is, it's always going to happen. The amount of data that you have with the best intentions is always going to grow. Sometimes simply for the reasons that Michael mentioned at the beginning. The resolution of video files is going up. The file sizes are going up. The average file size for pretty much every piece of application data is rising all the time. So there is always going to be storage creep, but it becomes a particular problem for backup. And one of the reasons it becomes a problem is those traditional backup systems that I mentioned earlier that do full backups. Now, a full backup is always going to be a full copy of all your data. So I've just done a little exercise here and said, okay, so let's say that what we're protecting here, we're going to have a data retention policy of, we're going to keep 30 daily backups and we're going to keep 12 monthly backups. Well, most backup vendors out there will tell you to do a a midweek incremental backup and a weekend full backup. And the reason for that is that the incrementals all are much faster to do because they're actually only backing up change data. But the fulls are there because the incrementals that you generate are chained. And the chain means that every incremental is dependent on every other one in that particular chain. So your Monday through Thursday incremental backups all depend on each other. One breaks, the chain breaks. So you do a full at the weekend and then you reset the chain again and start again the following week. So even if an incremental breaks, you can go back to the end of the week before and get that data back. Well, that's quite a lot of data loss. Michael again mentioned earlier that the companies saying that they can afford to lose sort of 24 hours or 48 hours are becoming an increasingly rare thing. What we do is we do incremental forever, but with our technology, the incrementals all act, restore, are mountable, are in actual fact full backups. They don't depend on each other. They're all fully independent. And so for that reason, if we just look at a little example of storage creep here, let's say we're protecting 10 terabytes of data. Now, in an ArcServe environment, with our data reduction and our incremental forever and compression, then for 30 dailies and 12 monthlies, we'll actually have a footprint of 10 terabytes, exactly the same as, well, just slightly more than the source data. A non-deduped will have within that 12 monthly full backups, as well as probably 4 weekly full backups within those 30 dailies, and then a number of incrementals. Calculate that out and you get to 16 times more data. And that only gets worse as the amount of data that you have increases, to the point where a relatively modest these days 100 terabytes suddenly turns into 1.6 petabytes of storage. And that's really the problem with storage creep. It's just the multiplying effect of it. So I hope I've kind of given you some information there that will help you understand what some of the issues are around backup today, what some of the modern threats are and how they can be combated. But if you do need to know more about any of this, then we have a number of resources available. There are case studies, usually case studies for almost every kind of environment, every kind of industry. One of the benefits of having been around so long that we do have a footprint in most industries, but so there's lots more data here. My details were on are on the slides, and I welcome please make contact through Michael and Planet IT if you need any more information from us. But I've been Steve at ArcServe. Hope it's been of interest to you, and thank you for giving me your time today and let me share my thoughts on backup and data protection. Over to you, Michael.
Fantastic. No, thank you ever so much for that, Stephen. It's always brilliant. Always brilliant to have you on board and contributing on these. It's always interesting. I still love looking through the features of the ArcServe product. I think it's fantastic. So as Stephen said, we're starting to wrap things up now in terms of the full content, but we will have a Q&A shortly. As Steve mentioned, please do feel free to get in touch if you'd like to have any discussions with myself or the team here at Planet IT. My details are on screen now. However, if you already do have an account manager at Planet IT, we are more than happy to offer a free consultation on your disaster recovery environment. So we're more than happy to have that phone call free of charge, talk you through what we think may well be some recommendations. Whether that ends up leading into an engagement with Planet IT further down the line or not, our priority is making sure that you guys have the knowledge and security and guidance that you need to make sure that ideally no one ends up in a situation where any of these products that we have to sell and support are actually needed, which would be fantastic, although slightly strange when you think about it. So with that said and done, we'll move on to the Q&A. So I'm just going to switch over here and see if we have any questions coming in. I think we have some flooding in already. Here we go. Okay, so I've got one starting here. So anonymous question, would cycled tapes not be immutable being out of the drive most of the time? Well, absolutely. So if it's not connected to the systems or the network at any point in time, and if it is offline, then yes, it would be considered immutable. Obviously, the tape or drive or whatever item in rotation that you have live in the rotation equipment at that time won't be, but any devices that you have that can't be contacted on the network or contacted through those devices would absolutely be immutable. Yes, of course.
Yeah, I'd just add to that, Michael, as well, that you're absolutely right. And tape has been the original form of air-gapped data, and it's as relevant now as it ever has been as a way of doing that. The point I always try to make, though, is that that immutable or air-gapped copy is not a solution in its own right. You also need to know about the integrity of that data, and that what you're going to do by restoring from it is not going to be reintroduce that malware that you would need that got rid of the data in the first place.
Absolutely correct. Yeah, you're so right there, Steve. It is imperative to make sure, as I was saying earlier, that the backup and security have to marry up really well. But certainly from a backup perspective, having the immutable storage is great. That then gets introduced as part of the DR plan overall. But Stephen, we've got one here for you actually as well. Quite an interesting question. So we've been asked, what is the licensing model for the ArcServe solution? Is it based upon a per user for 365 and per source terabyte for on-site storage, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, the good thing with ArcServe is we're quite flexible in terms of licensing schemes. So you can actually choose the one that works out most effective for you. So do we have per user licensing for Office 365? Absolutely, we do. That is an option. But you can also buy Office 365 protection under what we call our universal licensing scheme, where you simply license by the number of terabytes. And we've found that to be very effective in environments that have got high user counts, but actually low data counts. So things like universities, where there may be the largest one I deal with has 65,000 students. But to license that on a per user basis is no one was less than £1 million. Well, they simply couldn't afford a solution like that. But licensing on the volume of data instead, or by supplying appliances, is it's an order of magnitude less expensive.
Absolutely.
In terms of licensing for all the features that I spoke about, sending immutable copies, putting things in cloud, all of those things, none of that is a licensable feature. All of that comes as a standard feature. The only cost is the storage, the cloud service that you're sending it to, just as it would be to buy the tape library that you want to plug in. Again, no additional costs in terms of ArcServe licensing for any of those facilities.
Perfect. That's brilliant. Thank you for that, Stephen. Thank you very much. We just had another one come in here. Okay, so we've got here, the reason people do full backups is because incremental backups all depend on the previous ones. Isn't that a disaster waiting to happen with incremental forever? So interesting, in fact, it's one that we touched on towards the end there, Steve, with your last slide. Now, typically, yes, it would be with many other storage providers, but ArcServe's solution against this, which Steve, I'm sure, can give us a bit more information on, actually completely mitigates against that reverse ball and chain.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't rely on sort of synthetically created full backups being done on a regular basis, anything like that. Although we only ever back up unique and store unique data, every backup as I think I mentioned earlier, we can recover from. Every one of them acts like a complete independent full backup, but has all the advantages of the speed and the lower footprint of an incremental backup.
Perfect. Brilliant. Thank you for that, Stephen. Another one here that we just had come in. What is the most common security breach you see that can also impact backup? So I'll be honest with you, one of the one that we see the most of actually comes in the form of compromising credentials and phishing, in fact. So we see quite a lot that literally just being able to access a user account will give you enough access to run scripts, which then gives you further access potentially to domain accounts. And if these systems are linked on the same sort of credential network, all of a sudden your storage network could also be impacted, which is why we absolutely praise the idea of air gapping. We also look to encourage and set up different credential usage and not having these items directly connected to the same domain for where you're backing them up to. But you can also mitigate against this on a security perspective by implementing things like multi-factor authentication, making sure that you've got education in your users to make sure that they know what to look out for when it comes to phishing emails. But then also having the first line of defense, with backup being sort of your last line of defense, your first line of defense being, do you have the right sort of anti-spam? Do you have the right sort of filtering in place? You know, and it really is now a case where it's impossible to look at one without the other. But I would say certainly the most common breaches that we find come down to credentials being compromised and phishing attacks, for sure. And another one here. So for Office 365 backup only, is an on-site appliance required within the ArcServe solution? Stephen, I believe this one's one for you here.
Yeah, okay. So no, it's not. So we can offer, well, number one is, so appliances are actually only one way of consuming our solution. You can also purchase the software independently, and that can run on your own servers, your own hardware, or your own virtual machines. So, you know, so appliances is one way, and that would typically be on your premises. Software is another one that can run wherever you wish. So that could run on your servers in your environment. It could run in your tenancy, in your Azure tenancy, or your AWS tenancy, or anywhere you can run a Windows virtual machine on which to run our software. So you can run it wherever you wish. Again, this can be licensed on what we call universal licensing, so can still be licensed on either a per user or a per terabyte basis, whichever one works out most economically for you. But also can be bought as simply software as a service within the ArcServe cloud. So we have two choices there. They're priced exactly the same. You can buy it to be run as a service by us within the ArcServe cloud, which is hosted out of our Manchester data center, or you can buy it as an AWS service from our tenancy within AWS, and we operate it out of AWS London. Well, in actual fact, in this country, we operate out of AWS London, but we can offer your international sites. So if you want it to be geo-fenced to a particular location in the world, then we absolutely can offer that also.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. We've had another one here as well, actually, for yourself, Stephen. I'm conscious as well, guys, just bearing in mind here time that we did say we're running till 4. So we've got 3 minutes, so we might need to make this one. We might be able to fit one more question, but we might have to make this the last question here. Please do feel free to send any more or speak to your account manager or to us internally if you have any other questions you want to talk about after the webinar, of course. But Stephen, quite rightly saying, actually, it is a pretty bold statement that completely ransomware safe being claimed with the ArcServe appliances. I assume this is capable of being backed with a factual evidence and degree of certainty, of course.
Yeah, look, sorry, what I would say is that we have the most complete anti-ransomware offering in the data protection market today. Could I say that there is no possible way that the data could be affected? No, absolutely not. If someone got physical access to every piece of data that you had, both on and on-prem, you know, no one can insulate you against that. But we're so confident that the that the data is protected, that we are prepared to offer you your money back if you cannot recover your data. We are that confident. So it's a bold statement, but it's backed by our guarantee.
Fantastic. No, thank you, Stephen. Of course, all of these conversations that we're having here, starting off on these questions, we're happy to set up individual conversations on. I am conscious, again, like I said earlier, that we are starting to eke into that ending point of 4 o'clock. So I will cut the questions there for the time being, but please, as I say, do contact your account manager or speak to us directly. Hopefully you will have a record of my details there. I believe we are also recording the webinar, so we may well be able to have some sort of facility of sending this out off the back of that as well. But just before we call things to a close here, obviously, thank you all so very much for coming. I would also like to highlight our next event. So we have a virtual roundtable coming up on the 27th of May. And the virtual roundtable, it's effectively a panel of our special guests, and it's going to be an educational virtual roundtable event where the panelists are going to be discussing the challenges that they've faced in their educational seats as an IT professional and provider within them, and how they overcame those challenges. It's going to be a fantastic event. It's going to be not too similar to how we've looked at things here. It's going to be more of an open discussion rather than a presentation, and just talking through things on a more sort of organic basis. If you do have any interest in signing up for this, please do let us know. Contact your account manager or ourselves here at Planet IT, and we'll be more than happy to get you the details to get signed up there. But I would like to thank every one of you for your time here today. It's been a fantastic hour. It's been great fun for us. I hope it's been the same for you guys. I hope everybody's learned something and found it informative. And if anybody has any further questions or would like to engage with us for any more information, please do let us know.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Stephen, for a really great webinar today. Just to echo what Mike said, so yeah, if you do have any questions or you'd like any more information on ArcServe or any other backup vendors that we do here at Planet, don't hesitate to reach out, and please do take full advantage of the offer to have a call with Mike himself, just to talk around your backup strategy to make sure everything is a-okay. So have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for attending, and yeah, we look forward to seeing or speaking to you soon. Cheers.